Hello, everyone. Thank you. I'm Nancy Bikson. I'm the Managing Director of Chaplain York. Welcome to our webinar on end-of-year fundraising in the United States. Thank you very much for giving us an hour of your time for this topic, which is rather crucial. For those of you who've not experienced end-of-year fundraising in America, it is actually something which is quite significant. We have Sherry Bell with us, a fundraiser who specializes in sustainer giving. Sherry is located in Washington, D.C., and our own Heather Hill, who is our head of international philanthropy, who is in Austin, Texas. And they're both going to talk to you about, give you some more information about it. But just a quickie, and that is that one of the crucial things about end-of-year fundraising is that the American individual year end is December 31st. And whilst, as we all know, nobody ever gives just for a tax deduction, and in America, the tax deduction reduces your tax that you pay, having one available actually is something which is of consideration to people. And if you give on the last day of December in a year, you get the same tax benefits as you do if you give during the year. So it's not what gets people to give, but it is some of which of what sort of informs end of year giving. And so whatever way you are sorting out your American 501c3 that's going to accept these donations, it is just useful to understand that this is an important thing. If it's an individual that's giving by a check, the check has to actually leave their hands, and there has to be a postmark that's by the 31st of December. If it's shares, you've got to authorize the shares to go. So in other words, you have to you have to authorize a wire transfer. So the whole point is you've got to actually have it so you can't get the money back for it to count for that particular year. So that's the sort of tax and legal bit of it. It is part of this whole thing. So it is important to understand that. But I'll turn over to Sherry first, and then Heather to talk to you more about American end-of-year giving, which also, by the way, is the same thing in Canada. End-of-year giving is important in Canada. So a lot of what they're going to say about America is going to be applicable north of the border as well. So if I may call upon you, Sherry, to give us your thoughts. Thank you.
Sure. Welcome, everyone. Happy to be here. I am going to be delivering just some information about year-end giving in the U.S. and what does that mean for Americans? What does that look like? Some stats of who and how many people actually do it, and kind of bookending that giving season with Thanksgiving and then New Year's Eve and everything in the middle. So if, Sue, would you mind sharing? I just put a couple slides together to help support with some visual representation. If you just want to go to the next slide. Just to start with kind of a top line view of Thanksgiving in the US, most of you may know that Thanksgiving is always the last Thursday of the month. So this year, that happens to be on the 28th, I believe. And whatever day that is, that falls before Giving Tuesday, which is usually the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving in the US is really focused very largely on family gatherings and large meals and expressing gratitude, which is also the case in other countries. But in other countries, they probably don't have the focus of charitable giving that the US has. That's kind of the launch of the giving season. So a lot of nonprofits in the US, and I'm sure Heather may or may not get into this, but their year-end plan really starts in oftentimes October, at the latest November, and then kind of continues on through the end of the year. So the next slide, please, is just looking at a quick top couple tidbits about the holiday season. So this would include all holidays that are in December. However, specifically, this statement is around Christmas in the U.S. Of course, is marked by a strong giving culture, both among the family and friends and through charitable donations. While giving in other countries, of course, is also the focus, the emphasis on charitable giving may not be as pronounced. So that may be something that's a little bit different to those of you watching today. If you go on to the next slide, let's dig into some stats. So how much do Americans give in November? I find this very fascinating, and I always do. As Sue mentioned, my focus is in sustainer giving, but my start was in face-to-face fundraising, which dovetails nicely. And if we broke out the stats, would look probably very much like this. But donations in November contribute 10 to 15% of annual donations occurring during the month. So it's pretty overwhelming to think that that's such a significant amount. And in 2023, nonprofits raised, which is also, of course, in November. Actually, this year it falls in December. But Giving Tuesday, $3.1 billion on Giving Tuesday in the U.S., which accounted for about 4% of the annual online revenue for nonprofits. Moving to the next slide. This is just really quite interesting as well. And I think this is my last slide before I send you off to the wisdom of Heather and what she's going to provide today. But approximately 20% of annual nonprofit revenues are raised in December. So 26% in 1 month. 1 month is quite significant. The last week of December, about 47% of online revenue comes in during the last week of December. And the last day, literally people and businesses that are trying to get that tax deduction, which, as Nancy mentioned, offsets their taxable income, whether they're an individual or a business. Around 11% of annual charitable giving happens within the last 3 days. And the largest number of donations for the entire year, the most giving day of the year for the number of donations, happens on December 31st. And that comes in a myriad of ways, as Nancy also mentioned, online and through several other ways, face-to-face being one of them. So that's it. That's my little introduction to U.S. giving and the importance of it in the last 2 months of the year.
Sherry, thank you very much for that. I mean, when you're outside America, it just seems unbelievable that how important this is. So thank you very much for putting it into context for us, because it really is significant, and organizations outside America that are fundraising in America need to understand and to be able to take ownership of doing things in America during this period. So Heather, if you can talk to us more about this really significantly important part of U.S. fundraising. And if you could, you're mute. You're on mute. Heather, you're on mute. Heather, if you could now, Heather, say it again. Yes, thank you.
So I was saying, thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Sherry, and I'm happy to dive into a bit more of the strategic aspects of how you should be approaching this time of year. I just want to start by saying year-end fundraising is not limited to just a phenomenon in America. You also see this in Canada, which is another country where the tax year ends at the end of December. In Canada, donors receive a tax credit rather than tax deduction, but it is still something that's in their minds as they're approaching the end of the year. There are some European countries as well. So hopefully some of what you pick up today, you can also use for your year-end fundraising in other countries where this is relevant. And in addition, I would say you also see some year-end fundraising even in countries where there isn't a tax year-end at the end of December. And this tends to come from kind of, we could say, holiday spirit, whether that's the variety of different faith originating holidays that tend to pop up in December, or even just looking at New Year's. So people, as they're approaching the end of the year, are reflecting on what their year has been, how they'd like to end it, how they'd like to go into the coming year. So it does tend to be a very active year for giving and as a result, fundraising because of this. So do pay attention this time of year wherever you are, but particularly pay attention to it if you're fundraising in America. So as Sherry already mentioned, year-end fundraising can typically be thought of as December, but in America, it really does begin mid to late October. And the reason for this is, one, to be ahead of the holidays, because you're seeing increased mail volume as well as holiday travel, people taking time off as you're approaching that time of year. And as Sherry had also said, Thanksgiving in America is celebrated the last Thursday of November. And that's kind of the official, unofficial beginning of the holiday season. So once you kind of cross that date, schedules become very busy with travel, seasonal activities. And again, the mail tends to be higher volume once you hit that point in the year. So trying to get ahead of that by beginning in October, particularly second half of October, if you're fundraising in America, is very wise. And I just also want to talk about tailoring your donor strategies, which I think is particularly important in America because there's kind of this culture within the philanthropic giving world where donors are expected to be treated as if you know them. They want a little bit of personalization. They want to feel seen and known. So trying to segment and tailor your donor strategies is important. And again, there's a different expectation depending on the donor level. So if you're talking about annual fund, kind of annual supporter level donors who are not giving major gift amounts, but are happy to share some support with you, particularly at the end of the year, you'll want to do a series of fundraising communications, which again, now that we are kind of in this digital space, it's fine to do this digitally. But don't think that you can just send one appeal and that will be sufficient, particularly in America. As I said, the volume increases, and an interesting statistic for you is that there's been 36% growth in the charity sector in America since 2000. So between 2000 and 2023, 36% growth in the sector. What does that mean in the number of actual charities? So we went from 1.35 million 501c3 charities to 1.85 million 501c3 charities, who are all fundraising that time of year, who are all trying to get the attention of probably some of the same donors you're trying to reach at that time of year. So it's not just the increased volume that comes from seasonality, but it's also increased volume that's coming due to everyone trying to fundraise this time of year. So you'll want to have multiple touch points with your donor just to make sure things don't get buried in their inbox. Most donors don't only give to one charity. They typically give between four to seven charities. So you've got, it's not that they aren't happy to give to you as well as to someone else, but just know they're likely getting solicitations from multiple groups. So you want to make sure that yours stands out and doesn't get lost in the mix. So going back to this, start with a series of fundraising communications. Start in mid to late October and plan on at least 2 follow-ups. It's a busy time of year, getting a lot of fundraising from a lot of organizations, so multiple points of contact help. So I would say send one in the end of October, one immediately following the Thanksgiving holiday. So hopefully getting there sometime the very end of November, if not the first week in December. And I would send another one towards the later part in December. The important caveat here, if your donor has made a gift already, do not send them the follow-up solicitation, if at all avoidable. You can put a kind of disclaimer in your follow-up appeals just to note, we apologize if you've already made your gift and this message has crossed, and something like that. Most donors are very understanding if it's a matter of a few days, but if they've made their gift weeks ago and you're sending them another solicitation, that doesn't go over well. So do try to, if you're working from a CRM, keep that updated, pull new lists every time you're sending out an appeal to make sure you're not selecting donors who've already made their year-end gift. And then as you're sending the series of communications, make sure you have a theme or some kind of common thread that's tying the pieces together. So you don't want them to be 3 disparate pieces of communication asking for a donation. You'd like to have the same story, the same theme, the same focus going across. So it's reinforcing your message. It's repeating how the gift is going to make a difference, what the impact is going to be, and the donors see the continuity across them. Very easily recognizable. They don't think you're asking them for something different. So that's how you should be approaching some of the supporter level donors. For your major donors, again, you want to start early. So talking with them about their gift in mid to late October. And while you're doing this, make sure that you've been stewarding them and cultivating them prior to having this conversation about their year-end gift. You don't want the first touch point to be when you're asking. You want to be sure that you've been a good steward of them, that you've been having these conversations, that they feel that their last gift was well used and they've seen the impact of that. And as Nancy was saying at the beginning of our webinar, tax benefits aren't the driver of giving. People give to people. People give for very personal reasons. Donors are motivated by a wide variety of things. And at the core of that is their relationship to your organization and its mission and the work that you are doing. And their reasons for feeling an attachment to that and wanting to support it. However, the tax benefits do have a significant influence on timing and amount, particularly for major donors, especially for major donors. So they might be looking at what their tax obligations are as they're approaching the end of the year. Kind of, they've got, at this point, if you're reaching out in October, they've got 9 months to look back on and say, okay, so it's looking like my tax obligation is going to be X. So I want to maybe base my giving around, Y amount so that my obligation is reduced down to Z. Or if they have appreciated assets, they may be watching financial markets in the last months of the year just to make sure that they're kind of giving those at an optimal time where they're reducing any tax obligations, but also maximizing the value of what they're donating. A little aside on this, it is a presidential election year in America. I don't know if you've heard about this. I don't think anybody's talking about it at all, but if you hadn't heard, that is a factor. And one question that often comes up is, do the elections affect giving in America? Not really is the answer to that. The most significant shift that you will see is your major donors, to the point that I was just making, they're watching the markets. And in the couple of weeks leading up to the presidential election and for a couple of weeks after, the markets here tend to go a little bit haywire as investors are trying to anticipate who might be at office, especially not even just the president, but the Congress. So who's being elected or reelected to Congress, who's going to have control, because that influences policies and taxation and other factors. So investors are trying to game this out. The markets go a little bit nutty, but they all stabilize after the election and there's better sight as to what's coming. So kind of, you might see a little delay in giving until after elections from some of your major donors who are giving from invested assets as they wait for that to kind of hold tight. But for the vast majority of Americans, they're not really getting involved in political giving. And if they are, it tends to be at lower level amounts, $250 US or less. You're not the major donors who are really giving a lot to these candidates. That's kind of their norm. And they also typically have a pot set aside for their charitable giving. It's seen as two very different things for a lot of the US major donors. So I just would call that out. So going back to your major donors, be sure that you're listening to them, you're understanding what factors might be important to them, such as market fluctuations, such as family obligations they might have, other things that they have kind of on their plates, and make sure that you're paying attention to that as you're making your ask, that you're reflecting what they've told you, what will be meaningful for them as well. So timing might be a consideration, but the reason for the support is their personal connection to you. So be sure that you're including that in all your conversations. So for your donor strategies, my takeaway tip on this is to learn who your donors are, why they give to you, and what their giving preferences are, and adopt your strategy accordingly. The other thing I wanted to get into a little bit, apologies if I'm rambling, but I just wanted to get into a little bit of the cultural awareness, kind of the philanthropic culture in America, because year-end giving in America is quite different than it is in other countries. It's a little bit more assertive, might not be a strong enough word. Aggressive might be too strong, somewhere in between there. But multiple asks at year-end, this year-end period, that's last quarter of the calendar year, are normal. They're expected. So donors are expecting to be asked. They're expecting to receive multiple appeals. And as Sherry was saying earlier, there's a massive percentage of donations that are received in these last 3 months of the year. My tip for you is to use a multi-channel approach if you can. So use email, but also be posting on your social media. If you have the option to send text to your donors or WhatsApp, do that. Have your website reflecting what you're doing in these other channels. And if you can do print, that's great to do as well. Print often will drive online gifts. So the attribution is interesting there, but you can send print. The expectation would not be that your donor would mail something across the ocean, but they would probably then would go to your website and make a gift. But the main thing here is multi-channel is helpful in just making sure your message gets through and is remembered by your donors. It's also okay to ask for a larger gift at the end of the year. Typically, if you're doing fundraising in other times, you would base what you're asking for on the last gift amount that was given. But for year end, you can consider basing your ask on the largest gift amount that your donors made. If you're doing kind of a direct response type of approach, you could have a higher multiplier for your ask string, or you could ask something like, would you consider an extra $25, $50, $100, so that, and then tied into your mission and what the impact of that would be. And for your major donors as well, again, if you've been having good cultivation conversations with them, you'll be hearing from them if they have capacity and interest in giving more, and it's okay to ask for more than maybe you would at another time. So Sherry had also mentioned this thing called Giving Tuesday. So Giving Tuesday began 12 years ago as a giving day in America, essentially. And since then, it's grown significantly. It's now in over 90 countries around the world. You may be seeing some of the Giving Tuesday buzz where you are if you're outside America. It is something that's talked about a lot. A lot of US charities do participate in it. The vast majority of Americans still don't know what Giving Tuesday is, unless they're actively giving to an organization. There's not this kind of automatic recognition of this day. I've spoken to some people about, getting ready for Giving Tuesday, and they're like, what is that? So it is always the Tuesday following after American Thanksgiving. It's a way of kind of giving back, because typically following Thanksgiving, there's a lot of shopping days that happen in America. So this is kind of our penance in some ways of trying to give back. But it has become, as I said, a global day of giving, just to really help people think about this day of remembering charities and trying to do something meaningful as you approach the end of the calendar year. If Giving Tuesday is your only year-end appeal, that's probably not a good thing, because in the American market, as I said, a number of charities participate in this, many do. So your donors are likely going to receive many, many messages on Giving Tuesday, which means yours might get lost if that's the only message that you're sending to your donor. The far more effective strategy is to tie anything you do on Giving Tuesday into the year-end fundraising you're already doing. So it's okay to participate in Giving Tuesday, but I would say make it part of a larger strategy. And Giving Tuesday might nudge the timing of a gift, might help influence when your donors make their year-end gifts, but it's not going to be the driving reason that donors give. They're like, oh my gosh, it's Giving Tuesday, I need to make my gift right now. It might be a good nudge for them to do it if they'd already had it in mind, but it's not going to be their specific reason for giving to you. As I've already said, donors give to you because they care about your mission and what you're doing, and the positive impact of that work. So my tip is to have a presence on Giving Tuesday, so donors who know you and love you have the opportunity to support you on this day, but don't make it your only year-end fundraising. Do have a more robust strategy into which Giving Tuesday fits. Other thoughts on year-end giving, particularly in America? Seasonal messages are appropriate. Try to keep them inclusive unless there is a specific holiday that's tied to your mission, but referencing the seasonality of the time of year is fine. And as Sherry started to get into, the last 3 days of the year in America are big giving days, and that tends to be a little bit more connected to the tax year. So 10%, and I saw Sherry had a source at 11%, but that's when giving in America happens on those last 3 days of the calendar year. Much as I've said through other parts of year-end fundraising in America, multiple messages on that last day of the year are acceptable, they're common. And tying these into your, again, same as you would with Giving Tuesday, tying these into your year-end fundraising strategy is important. So there's a consistency across what you're sending, but do add an element of urgency as you get into these last 3 days. Time is running out. Don't miss out on this urgency. There's a lot of behavioral science research behind it. Urgency is a good motivator for giving. And for donors who do have concerns about their tax obligations, it's even more of a good motivator for them. We do have a recorded webinar and a workbook for all just about giving and fundraising on these last 3 days in America. So if you're interested in more detailed information about how you would put together a campaign for those, particularly for those last 3 days of the year, let us know. We're happy to send you the link to the recording and the workbook that we did in the past. And then the other thing that can't be said enough is to really be sure before you even start your year-end fundraising that you have a plan for stewardship. Thanking your donors is critical. The primary reason donors say they stop giving, this is research that's been conducted, gosh, I think we're pushing 15 years now. It's annual research that's done in America, asking people about their giving behaviors. And there's always a question about why someone doesn't make a repeat gift to a charity. And the primary reason, and this has been consistent since this research began, is that the donors don't feel they've been thanked for their last gift in an appropriate way. And the second most common reason is they don't feel that they received adequate information about how their gift was used, the impact that it made. So as you're going into year-end fundraising, be sure you've already got your plan on how you're going to follow up, how are you going to make that personal and meaningful for your donors. So again, it's not just a matter of them having the tax receipt, but it's a matter of them being thanked. Very critical. Americans are very fussy about this. And especially now with the gift impact, particularly from major donors, they want to know exactly as much as you can convey what their gift is. How did they make a difference? How did what this donor did change things for your organization, change things for your beneficiaries? So who the end recipients of the work that your mission is doing. So being able to tie that in is very important. But frankly, as I said, a lot of this applies to any fundraising you're doing, whether it's America or elsewhere. Donor stewardship is key to having sustainable donor relations and donor retention. It's far less costly to keep the donor you have than to go out and to acquire new donors. So taking good care of them, helping them feel valued and appreciated, because in the end, it's the donors and their support that keep our organizations going. So helping ensure that they hear that from you and that they know that is important. So that's, I've talked long enough. But with that, I would open up if there's any questions on things. I see there's a few in the chat. Yes, there will be a recording sent to everyone, and we do have everything I've just gone over is also in a workbook that we'll be sending out as well. So you'll have all the information. And I see Graham has asked, is it fair to say to focus most fundraising from USA alumni in October through December and not during the year? I would actually say no. I would say you certainly want to be fundraising in October through December, but periodically I would, at least once a quarter for those other three parts of the year, those other 3 quarters of the year is appropriate. If your school has a giving day at a different time of year, definitely include your American alumni in that as well. But it's perfectly fine to be fundraising other times of year. You want to probably put the greatest investment of time and energy into that last part of the year, as that is, as I said, when Americans tend to be primed to give. But I think with alumni fundraising in particular, reaching out at other times in the year is perfectly fine, and can help you have good sustainable funding throughout the year, and not just kind of lumped into that last quarter of the calendar year. So I see Sherry also noted that email, SMS, and text messages, DRTV, campaigning can be overwhelming coming up to election time. So to my point on these kind of big election years, which again, I don't think anybody's talking about it, but just trying to be mindful of what you send going. November 6th is election day coming up here in America. So just kind of maybe pausing a little bit in that week around it with your messaging, just to make sure it doesn't get lost. But don't abandon the month of November in its entirety. Just know that around those, particularly those last few days leading up to the election and on the 6th itself, it's going to be a bit crowded. So maybe time your things for before and after.
Heather, is it worth mentioning the fact that, quite rightly, you said have a good plan, start, end of October, well, or middle of end of October. Well, we're there now. So for those who are on this webinar that haven't a plan, because obviously we're talking about it, is it worth them, at least making some contact, even if it's not the bright strategic plan you'd want to have, just because, with their donor base. I mean, sometimes they have, depending on whether you've got, obviously, if you're looking for $1 million donations and you haven't asked anybody for it up to now, that's probably not the time to just write and say, well, we know it's the end of the year. Wouldn't you like to get rid of that $1 million that you got sitting around? But on a broader base, is it worth ensuring that at least you say something? Because sometimes Americans, we had a client once that they had a 501c3, the American board was absolutely keen to do it, and the foreign organization didn't really understand as much the significance, and actually irritated their American supporters by not saying something about it at the end of the year. So is it worth doing something, even if it's not the level that you would hope that people would get to for this?
Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, the Thanksgiving holiday is the last Thursday in November for America. If you can get something out before then, you're doing great. And again, it doesn't have to be this elaborate, complex thing, but just something that's very that speaks to your donors and speaks to the work that you're doing in your mission, something that's personal that makes the connection. But there still is plenty of time to start. I would say ideally, if you can get it out before, so it'd be, I believe 28 November this year is the Thanksgiving holiday in America. So if you can have a touch point before then, that's great. But you still have time to get 2 touch points out in December, even if it takes you a little, if you need the month of November to kind of pull things together. But certainly, you still have plenty of time. November and December are excellent months to be fundraising. And again, just mindful of the crowding around the 6th of November for the election, and that week where Thanksgiving falls, so that week where the 28th is in, there might be a bit crowded, or you might just have a harder time reaching people because they're traveling or things for the holiday. But do start now if you haven't already. There's still plenty of time. You haven't missed out. And with your major donors, hopefully you've been stewarding and cultivating them. There's still time to start those conversations as well. Because as I said, they're likely waiting until after the election season to make their major gifts anyway, because that's when the markets will level out a bit. So you do still have an opportunity this year to connect with them about their year-end gift. Hopefully you've been speaking with them already. Major donors tend to get a bit cranky if you're only speaking to them when you want money from them. But yes, ample time still.
Do you want to answer, Christopher? Heather, do you want me to?
Yes, I'm happy to answer, and Nancy, if there's anything you'd like to add as well. But yes, U.S. citizens at retirement age can donate to charity tax-free through their individual retirement accounts. This is true. It's for a particular type of retirement account that's called an IRA. And when Americans reach the age of, I believe it may have gone up to 72. I'd have to check to be sure. Sherry may know, but I believe it's like 72 and a half. They're required to take distributions from their IRA, whether they want it or not. And the option that these donors have, if they don't want the money, because if they receive it, it's taxable income. So if they don't want it and they have to take it, then they're getting taxed on it. That's not an ideal situation. But Americans who have these IRA funds, who are at the age where they have to receive a distribution from it, can opt to have that distribution go directly to a 501c3 charity in the US instead. So the funds never touch the donor's account. They go straight from the retirement fund holder to the charity. Then they get the tax break on it. There's no tax obligation on this distribution, and the charity receives the benefit. So yes, that is an excellent option for year-end giving. It's just a good thing to put in front of your donors throughout the year. The timing varies because it kind of depends on the age, timing of turning of age, and how the fund holder, so the company that's holding the retirement fund, processes it. So just as you're reaching out to donors, it's just a good thing to just have a little, do you have an IRA fund? Would you like to give directly? Would you like to donate your, it's called a RMD, required minimum distribution? Would you like to donate your RMD to our 501c3 charity? So just making sure donors know that's an option, that they can do it. But Nancy, if there's anything you'd like to add, I'm sure you will say it more articulately than I just did.
I will, but I'll say something slightly broader, which is that this is all part of the whole plan giving that happens in America. And I think we've had a webinar on it, so we've got a video about plan giving. It's worth you knowing about it. We're coming out with a whole materials that you can use, because it's something that everybody should be offering to their donors in America, whether it's end of year or whatever. And plan giving is everything from leaving money in your will to giving an insurance policy to a charitable remainder trust, which gives the donor a whole bunch of benefits, plus you the benefit of knowing that the money's coming to you. But that's a whole suite of things. And if you don't know anything about plan giving, please do look at our webinar on it, because it is another significant bow to any American fundraisers, well, string to the bow. So that was going to be clever, but it didn't work. So that is part of it. And obviously, again, most plan giving is done with fairly large donations. It's not something which is done in the last 3 days, because they take time to organize a charitable remainder trust, or obviously if it's a gift in will, the person has to die. And so that may not be on the last 3 days. But so you just need to familiarize yourself with the whole suite of it. Again, look at our webinar. If you want, you can go online and look at the Metropolitan Museum of Art's plan giving materials, or universities, because everybody will have information about that. Some of it's not perfect for what you're doing, but and how you're going to deal with things, particularly annuities. But there's a lot of other things which is quite significant. So yeah, it's all part of it. That's probably the, yes, it's worth offering that. Obviously, you want to say you can feel free to give shares. I mean, whatever 501c3 you're using in America, whether it's our US Foundation, or whether it's somebody else's intermediary, or you have your own 501c3, I would also say be prepared to have a lot of checks and things happening at the end of the year, so that that you are prepared to get receipts out quickly. The other thing is that it's very important, if you get envelopes with checks in it, that you keep the envelope with the postmark on it, because that can help you help your donor to establish that they actually gave them sent the check before the end of the year. Checks are obviously reducing in usage in America, but they still are there, and that's just something you should be doing. I note that Kevin Smith, the executive director of our US Foundation, is on the call, and he and his team are sitting there waiting for the post bags of fund holders' donations to hit, because January really is, a time when it does quadruple the donations that come in. So it's absolutely important for that.
Yes, and I just want to my mind is still with me. I was correct in saying 72 is the age where you have to start taking distributions from an IRA, so that is the age. And so you can delay it depending on when you turn that age, you can delay it until the 1st of April of the following year. But so definitely that first quarter of the year is actually a good time to be speaking about that. And yes, plan giving in general is significant in America. And I would say as well, that tends to be someone's largest gift, tends to be the legacy gift or plan gift that they leave you. But they're often not your major donors now. So looking at the donors who are, consistent over the years, who are giving to you loyally, maybe not at major gift levels, but have been with you a number of years, those are often your best legacy prospects. So do have that in mind. Don't just focus on your major donors when you're thinking about legacy fundraising or planned gifts from America, but do be looking at your most loyal donors. It's often forgotten, but when you get those surprise bequest gifts and gifts in will and things, they often tend to come from someone who is flying below the radar, so to speak, but had been giving to you for a number of years.
Super. Are there any other questions? We're happy to take them in the chat, or if you want to put your hand up or a virtual hand up, we're happy to answer anything.
One other bit that I wanted to mention, just following up on Graham's question about fundraising from alumni in America. And again, this is a little bit of a deviation from year end, but since you're all on here, if it's useful for you, the other times of year where American alumni will be kind of keen to give to their alma mater, or their children's alma mater, depending, as you're thinking of fundraising from parents as well. Looking at kind of May, June, as you're getting into graduation, people tend to be thinking about reminiscing about their own graduations or wanting to do something celebratory in honor of graduates at that time of year. The other time is in August. So people are coming back from summer holidays. It's back to school time. So kind of August, September is another time where you could reach out to your American alumni. With back to school, they're feeling nostalgic about their school days, and might be likely to give. So just a little bonus tip for you, for those of you who are fundraising from your alumni in America.
Super. Thank you. Any other questions? We've got two experts here, so this is your time. Before we finish and you rush to your desks to start writing to your donors. Well, in that case, I think it's left to me to say thank you very much for coming. We very much hope that this was useful. It is one of the hardest things is knowing what in a different culture really matters, and what is stuff that you can, how you deal with it, what's things you can ignore. You know, you're obviously, if you're outside America, it's a completely different system, and it's trying to get in their heads and do things that's expected by your donors. So we thank you very much for spending the hour with us, or 47 minutes, and hope that you found it useful. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time if you have any other questions that you wished you'd ask and didn't have time to, or forgot about. And we wish you, from Chaplain York, we wish you a very happy day, and good fundraising, and the very best, for the end of the year and always. So thank you very much for joining us. Bye.